Thanks so much. I sort of have an impossible task because I've got 9 minutes to talk about when I think you should just totally write off a company and walk away from it. And I've shut down a couple of companies now. The first one was super duper painful, and the ones after that were actually pretty okay. And this is quite a personal topic, and so you may totally disagree with me. But I think it's worth thinking about a little bit in advance. So maybe if you think I'm totally wrong, it's still useful. If you imagine two professionals, one's an artist, a painter, and another is a professional bridge engineer. He builds bridges. If we have the artist, and the artist makes a terrible painting, and everyone goes, oh, that's the worst painting ever, do we care? Not really, because we judge artists by their best work. We look back at the masterpieces, we look for the strokes of genius, and we ignore all the failures. I'm sure Leonardo has all sorts of terrible drawings in his notebooks, but we ignore those, right? We look at the Mona Lisa. However, if you're a bridge engineer, your mistakes do matter. If you make the world's greatest bridge, but you also have 99 bridges which fall over, like you're not a very good bridge engineer, right? Bridge engineers are judged by their mistakes, not by their successes. And when we're thinking about failure for startups, we have to decide whether we're more like, as an entrepreneur, whether we're more like the artist or the bridge engineer. And I think that rationally, in our heads, we all want to believe we're like the artist. We say this over and over. We say, oh, the failures don't matter. You know, like Drew from Dropbox is like, ignore the failures. You only have to succeed once. Then you're rich for life. And this is kind of true, but at the same time, it's hard, right? It's like, it's difficult to walk away. When do we do? Where do we draw that line? Our friend comes in. He's like, oh, my company failed. And we go, oh, I'm so sorry. Are you okay? So obviously, we do care about the failures somehow. But where exactly on this line are we? And I think that comes down to how badly we can get hurt by failing a company. And as far as I can tell, like usually it's actually pretty safe to shut down a company. Weirdly, you become more employable. You get like tons more job options. Your network has grown significantly. So a lot of good things happen. But there's maybe some bad ones as well. It's bad if you totally destroy your reputation so badly that no one's ever going to work with you ever again. Right? And then it's also bad if you go into deep, deep financial debt where you spend the rest of your life trying to pay off your credit card bills. Because both of those take away your freedom to then start another company. And I hear a lot of people worrying about the first one. They go, oh, do VCs like to invest in a founder who has already failed? And I want to make the case that it doesn't matter, because if you bring a VC, even if they've written you off in the past, suddenly you have a company and the metrics are killer, it's growing like crazy, the revenue's off the charts, like they're going to do that deal. You know, the numbers tell the story. It's up to you to build that good company, but at some point your history kind of stops mattering. But then what about people who aren't in the startup world? What about traditional businesses? We want to partner with them. We want to sell to them. Will they take us seriously? Again, not when you're small, but they weren't going to anyway. But if you get the company going, then yeah, definitely. Like kind of the proof is in the company. It's in the product. It's in the numbers. So I don't think that one matters as much as we intuitively think it does. But the second one definitely does matter. And this was the mistake that I made at my first company, and it's why it was so painful to shut down. We ran it for about 4 years. We raised a couple rounds of funding, went through Y Combinator. We raised a round in San Francisco and another round in London, which is why I'm out in this side of the pond now. And by the end of that company, all 4 founders were totally broke, which doesn't really make sense, right? Because we were legally protected. We were incorporated, so there was no personal liability, and we had investors, so we had money. So why did we allow ourselves all to go bankrupt? And it was kind of, we slipped into an easy trap, and it's like, it's not really clear when a company is ending. I guess I'd always kind of expected to wake up one day and log into my Google Analytics, and it's like you're out of business. And I'd be like, darn. And then you call everyone and you go, oh, I'm so sorry. It turns out we're out of business. I didn't know that was going to happen. It's not my fault. It just happened to us. And that never happened. And what I realized was that at some point I needed to choose to quit, which is a way harder thing to do than to, like, failure happens to you, but quitting is something you do as a founder, and you feel like you're giving up on everyone who's believed in you, and it's like, it's awful. And so what we did is when we started running out of investor money, and the economy was down, and our metrics weren't good enough, so we couldn't raise a strong follow-on round, so we're like, well, we have these employees, so we'll just, like, the founders will just put in the money, and we'll just pay for 1 more month of our employees' salaries. And then another month passes, and you go, okay, 1 more month, and another month passes, 1 more month, and then, like, hopefully you don't start taking out loans at this point, right? And that's why like we just allowed it to go, because we were waiting for it to be clear. We were waiting for someone to come down from the sky and be like, it's over. And that never happens. It's your responsibility. And what I've realized is that you can always rationalize continuing one more month. And I know this goes directly against some of like the clear advice that you heard this morning from Mark and from a bunch of other people who are much smarter than me who say never quit. And I think there's a case for that. But if we accept that at some point it's like correct to quit, we don't want the company to drag us and our team down with it in all cases, then we need some clear, bright lines. And one way to divide companies as we think about them is you either have funding and employees, or you don't, and it's just the co-founders. So if we've got funding and employees, I actually take other people's money really seriously. So if I've raised money, I have a responsibility to do the best I can do to make good on that, right? Same if I've hired people. If I've hired them, I'm going to do my damnedest to make sure that they have a job and that it works out well for them. But if you totally use up all your runway and you spend all that money, you cannot make good on that promise anymore. And if you wait until you've totally run out of money, then the shutdown is really awkward and explosive. Whereas I think it's right to start this a bit in advance. So if you have money and you're down to 2 months, you start going, okay, we've lost it. It takes 3 months to raise funding. So when there's 2 months of cash left, we can't raise more funding, so we need to start winding things down. And this is actually great because it gives you time to find your employees new jobs. You can make awesome recommendations for them as the founder of a company. You can make sure they're all placed into places that are going to be great for their careers. For us, with our investors, we spent a few months kind of keeping the company running to try to see if we could do a partial exit to return some of their money. So we look for people who would want to acquire our code base or our technology. We look for other startups we could merge into so they would get a partial equity exit. And you can't do that if you wait till you're totally broke. So I think having a graceful shutdown, you want to avoid the shutdown if you can, but doing it gracefully, it does take a bit of time, and I think it's worth factoring that in and giving yourself and the people who depend on you that privilege. If it's just you and your co-founders, this is actually a pretty cool situation, and this is where I see the most people screw it up the most. With my company, 3 years in, I guess we'd been drinking a lot, and finally someone had the courage to ask, and it was the 4 co-founders, and someone goes, do any of you guys like this company? And the other 3 of us were all like, no, I hate it. I thought you guys liked it. And just none of us had been like brave enough to be like, oh, I don't actually, do you guys like this? Is this what you want to be building? Should we really be spending 4 years on this? And we hated it. And that was very clarifying for us. And so I think there's a real opportunity cost issue. If you're 6 months into a project and it's just you and your co-founders, no one else depends on you yet, you have an amazing luxury of being able to walk away. And so the way to get this out is to ask yourself, what would we be doing, either as a team or as individuals, if we weren't doing this? Maybe you take the whole team and you go after a more fun or a better opportunity. Maybe you break up individually and you go off into other careers or you find different co-founders. You don't have to do this, and it's true, the grass always looks greener on the other side, and you don't want to just bounce from like fun idea to fun idea and never actually get anywhere. But you also don't want to trap yourself in kind of a prison of your own creation. And it is worth asking these questions. Like, just asking this question does not destroy the company. And it's what you got to talk about this stuff with your co-founders. And when you look at the common advice, which is like, just don't die, just stay alive for long enough and eventually you'll be successful. The way I like to think about this and put this in perspective is I think of it as your startup career as an entrepreneur versus a single company. And what I would advise is like, instead of just don't die with a single startup, I would say just make sure that you're not put in a position where you have to stop doing startups. And to me, the only really way that happens is if you totally wreck your finances so that you're deeply in debt and you have to go get the day job just to pay off your bills. But if you can stay out of that situation, like if you can drop back into freelancing, if you can just kind of keep yourself and your team safe, you maintain that freedom, and eventually over your career, it's like, you know, it's like the artist. You only need one masterpiece. You only need that one great success. So to me, that's it. And there's nothing else that's that scary. To be honest, like if you come up to me and you're like, my company went out of business, I'm going to be like, cool, what's next? Like, I'm not going to feel that bad for you because it's fine. You know, and part of it as well is that we need to surround ourselves with people who have this worldview, because we really do get a lot of the way we judge ourselves from the way people around us judge us. And that comes into the truth that the emotional issues are real. I can tell you rationally that it's okay to shut down a company. I could tell you this till the end of the earth. And in your heart, in your brain, you might believe me, but in your heart, you're not going to. Because it's still so painful to walk away from this thing, because you love it, right? You've poured so much of your time and love and care and attention into building a great product. You've made promises to your customers to, like, there's so much in there. It's hard to walk away. And sometimes it's right to do that. But that doesn't make the pain not real. The pain is real. And it's okay to take a sabbatical. Like after my first company, I took a year off where I set up a little lifestyle business where I was like, I want to work the fewest hours possible and just like sit around. And I spent a year doing that, and it was great, and I really needed it. And then I'm like, okay, and then you fall back in love with another startup idea. And like if you go, like it's hard, you go to a family gathering, let's say the next holiday, and everyone goes, oh, how's your business? And you go, oh, we failed. Like they can see that you're upset, so they're gonna be upset, and there's this whole spiral of like negativity around it. If they go, hey, how's your startup? And you go, didn't work, this is what we're doing next. Everyone's like, oh, cool. And suddenly you're kind of out of that emotional pit. So a lot of it is what you bring to the table. It's who you surround yourself with, but it's also what you bring. So I think, to me, the entrepreneur is like a lot closer to the artist than to the bridge builder. And the kind of like the final thing I would say is, starting a company, you do take on responsibilities from other people. So you want to make good on the responsibilities. You always want to consider the opportunity costs of what you and your team could be doing if you weren't doing this. Ignore the naysayers, and most of all, like protect yourself so that you can have a long, brilliant career doing this stuff. Like startups are super fun. Once you fall in love with them, it's a shame if you have to leave them. So like allow yourself to keep doing this. If you were an artist and you only ever got to paint one painting, it would be really hard to be a master. It's like you got to be able to stay in the game so you can keep making work, so you have a chance to be brilliant. So thanks a lot.
Cool.
Cool.
Great. We can now run a test, right? So Rob said startups are super fun. So how many of you agree with that? Please raise your hand. Okay, I expected more hands. Please more. Who want to go to the lunch? Okay, not everybody. Cool. I got one exclusive question for Rob before we go outside. So who will raise the hand first? Yes. Okay. Yes.
Hello. Did you ever fire anybody?
Yeah.
How does it feel?
Yeah.
No, it's awful. The first one, because it was actually, it ended up being everyone, right? Because we did it in a bad way where we started dropping people one at a time to try to keep stretching our remaining funding. So there was just this like ongoing period of agony. But we tried to be honest about the finances, so everyone in the company kind of knew where the finances were. And as weird as this is to say, they sort of knew where they stood in terms of like how long it would be till they got fired if we didn't fix things. And it was really awful. But that's the reality. And some people, I've seen some companies where when they're running out of money, they'll like fire everyone and just the founders will go back into bootstrapping mode so that they can keep things going. And while that's an option, I think it's a really tough thing to do to yourself, because ultimately it's sort of nice if you're already on the funding track and you can't raise another funding round at a higher valuation, then in some ways that's a nice bright line where you're like, okay, we didn't do it. We're not growing fast enough, so we can walk away. And I think you do need these kind of these unconditionals, these just rules for yourself, because otherwise you can just expose yourself to this pain for a hugely like extended period. And at some point, it's like for everyone, it's like move on to the next thing. And my favorite real quick example of this is one of my buddies had just raised a funding round, and he's like, come on, you gotta believe in me. He pulled together this miraculous round, and then it must have been 2 weeks later, he just suddenly went out of business. It turned out the whole thing they were doing, just the foundations were it was all gold dust and nothing worked. And he went back to he couldn't believe it. He went back to the investors, and he's like, I just lost all your money in like 2 weeks. We're out of business now. And the most amazing thing, the lead investors were like, well, first they stared at him with disbelief, and then they're like, well, you're a really good founder. Will you come be an entrepreneur in residence at our firm until you figure out what your next company is so we can invest in that? And so at some points, it's like, they want his time to be spent in better places as well. So like you are allowed to, you're allowed to leave companies behind. It's like, it's a long-term thing. You're going to be doing this for a lot of years.
Cool.
So anyway, thanks a lot, guys.